I'm going to start with a question, if that's all right. And if you've got one of these, can you put it in the air? So who in the room today has got a mobile phone? Okay. If you haven't got your hand in the air, you're either very lazy or you're lying, I think. So all put your hands in the air. Right. How many of you today have used WhatsApp to like manage a group project, maybe? Or used Facebook to organise a sports team? Used Deliveroo? Got home from Jester's using Uber? Right. So the mobile phone has fundamentally changed the world, because when I was at uni here in 2006, I didn't do any of those things. It's changed all industries. But has anyone here walked into a hospital recently? Have you had a hospital appointment or a GP's appointment? What was that like as an experience? Pretty terrible, right? Did you get letters? Did you get a letter through the post?
You get booked twice for different practices.
It got booked twice for different practices. Anybody use anything digital to access the hospital appointment? No. The mobile phone hasn't yet changed healthcare. And particularly when you look at that in the context of the fact that the world spends 10% of its GDP on healthcare provision. So it spends £6 trillion a year looking after people. And even more scarily, 30% of that is waste. So we spend £2 trillion a year worldwide wasted on healthcare. Fortunately, the mobile phone can and will change healthcare. And in 2012, I started a company which is called DrDoctor to do exactly that. To take advantage of this supercomputer in your pocket and fundamentally change the way that we interact with healthcare providers. And our mission is to provide the platform that allows patients and hospitals to work more closely together so we can provide better, more accessible care for everybody. And it's quite amazing, really, to think that how I got there. So how does a ship scientist, is there any ship scientists in the room at all? I'm quite interested. So I've got one ship scientist, amazing. There seems to be an incredible propensity of ship scientists to become entrepreneurs. Turns out the person that spoke a month ago was a ship scientist, and there's a guy called Ali Mitchell started a company called Huddle who inspired me on my ship science journey, who turns out was 2 years ahead of me, has built $1 billion business in Silicon Valley. So how does a ship scientist become an entrepreneur? So I left Southampton University in 2006, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with myself, to be honest. So I did what a lot of people do, and I went and worked for an oil and gas company. I spent a couple of years working for an oil and gas company in Poole, and I learned a lot about what it was like to be in the working world, but realised that maybe that wasn't for me. And I went and worked, and I was very lucky that I went and worked for a company called Newton. It was a consultancy firm. And what Newton did was they did operational improvement. So one of my first ever projects at Newton was in an onion peeling factory. So if you've ever eaten a Domino's pizza or a New Covent Garden soup, I probably had my hands on your onions. And while I was in this onion peeling factory in Bedford, which was probably the least glamorous consultancy project in the world, I was really lucky that I met my co-founder, Ranesh. And Ranesh and I kind of bonded over a shared love of onions and cars and washing the smell of onions out of our hair overnight. And we started talking about entrepreneurship. And him and I both ended up getting sent into the healthcare part of Newton. So I wasn't at all interested in healthcare. I didn't know anything about the way hospitals worked, and I actually pushed back quite hard against being set on that challenge. I didn't think that it was for me. And when I turned up at Coventry Hospital, I was partially appalled and partially amazed by what the clinicians and what the patients had to manage. I remember sitting in outpatients one day doing a study, and I was meant to be watching clinic flow and efficiency. And I watched 4 or 5 different people turn up at the front desk, all with different pieces of paper, all with different appointment times on, all of whom were told actually that clinic was cancelled and they had to go home. And it was at that point I thought I could do something better. And to be honest, at that point I'd been sucked in by a bit of a love for healthcare and the fact that it was this interplay between people and process that I don't think you get in any other industry. So Ranesh and I recruited our third co-founder, Perrin, who is now our CTO. And we went and had a picnic in Windsor Great Park. And over strawberry bellinis and smoked salmon, we cooked up this idea of building an app to allow patients to manage their own outpatient appointments. We thought this was a great idea, and we were really excited. So we went and pitched it to something called Bethnal Green Ventures, which is an accelerator. I'd never heard of an accelerator before then, but BGV invested in companies that had a social purpose. So health, environment, loneliness. And And they listened to what we had to say. And I think we were called Semantic Health back then, which I think is probably the worst name for a business ever. And our idea was we're going to democratise healthcare. And I remember it being the single most exciting thing I'd ever done. I walked out of the interview with BGV and I was on fire with excitement. But we didn't think we were going to get a place. So when I got a phone call from Paul Miller, who was the founder of BGV, saying that they wanted us on the programme, I was aghast, I think, is the expression. So the three of us handed in our notice together on the same day, worked our 6 weeks, finished Newton on a Friday, and on the Monday we started at BGV as Semantic Health. And being part of BGV was such an important part of my journey because it allowed us to take what was just a concept and make it real. They gave us an office space, they gave us mentors, in fact they do everything which Future Worlds does here. And it allowed us to feel like a business. Sitting down that first day at that desk, white startup-y desk in Google campus in Bonhill Street in London, we really felt like we were going to achieve something. But more than anything, they taught us the power of network and the power of listening. So rather than building the outpatient app that we thought we were going to build, what we did was we phoned up a friendly hospital, which was Heatherwood and Wexham Park Hospitals, which is near Slough, and we said, could we come and talk to your patients, please? And actually, during the first 3 months of the accelerator, we didn't write a single line of code. What we did was we talked to 1,500 different patients, we talked to thousands of doctors, we talked to lots of operational managers, and we asked them what their biggest problem was. And what patients told us was they wanted to know where they were going, why they were going there, and what the purpose of that appointment was. And if possible, could we make it easy for them to change if they couldn't make it? So the very first version of DrDoctor was built on text message. And actually, it wasn't even really built on any kind of computer. It was built on Steve, who was our first hire, sending text messages to patients. And that was amazing, because that allowed us to iterate quickly and learn and test. And what we learned was that by telling patients what was going on, we could reduce non-attendance. And non-attendance was a problem that this particular hospital had. So the national non-attendance rate in the NHS is 11%. And that is about a £1.4 billion a year problem for the NHS. We found that by sending a text message, we could reduce non-attendance by about 30%, and we could take a huge amount of stress out of the process for patients, so people could know where they were going and why they were going there. These days, we send 60 million text messages a year. So we've gone from Steve sending a few texts off his phone to 60 million different text messages a year across the NHS. And actually, funnily enough, I still go back to Heather and Wexham Park, where they're doing all sorts of new stuff with our technology. And one of the ladies in the booking team still asks me, how is Steve getting on? Is he still sending all the messages? So we had an idea and we knew that it worked, but we needed some funding. And DrDoctor's a bit different to most startups in that we haven't ever taken any venture capital, so we still own all of the equity ourselves. So we had to find a way of funding this thing. So we hustled. And at that point, there was something called the ITK, which is the Information Technology Toolkit, I think, or some awful acronym. And it was offering £60,000 grants to people that would make their product ITK compliant. And we didn't have a product, we had Steve and a mobile phone. So we thought that'd be a great thing for us to go and do. So we joined up with a couple of other startups that we'd met through networking, and we built an ITK connector for our non-existent product, which meant we got a £60,000 grant. Unfortunately, that grant went to the hospital, not to us, which was fine because the hospital understood what was going on. But it absolutely confused the goods receivable department. So there we were. We had no money at this point, so we'd run out of money. I had sold my car to keep going. My wonderful wife, Claire, had supported me by paying the rent. But we were pretty desperate for this money. But the hospital couldn't pay us because no goods had been received. I ended up walking into the goods receivable department, in through the kind of where the lorries enter, Department of Heather and Wexham Park Hospitals, and giving them a pack with a CD-ROM in, which didn't have anything on it, so this bloke would sign a piece of paper to tell them that some goods had been received. Only once I'd done that could we get our £60,000 released and I could pay my rent. That's the level of hustle you've got to do at the start of these things. Fortunately, we got the 60 grand, we managed to invest that in turning Steve into a real product. And I was then really, really, really lucky that I got to meet a general manager of women's services at Guy's and St Thomas, a lady called Jenny Thomas. And Jenny had a problem with her DNA rate, and at the time she was doing an MBA at London Business School, and she was really interested in technology. And she said to me, oh, wow, you've got some technology that solves that problem. Can you come and talk to us at Guy's? So there I was, really excited, a year into our new startup, and we had guys in St Thomas as a potential customer. This is going to change everything. So Jenny got me in, and we pitched the idea, and I was immediately hit by, oh, there's no way you can do this because of information governance. Oh, if you want to integrate with our computer, because we integrate DrDoctor with their patient administration systems they have in hospitals. So hospitals have a big thing that they call a patient administration system with all the patients in it, and then we kind of sit on top of that and we do our smart patient interaction stuff on top. They said, if you want to get the data out, you've got to sign all these forms, you've got to have a minimum revenue of £5 million, and you've got to be on this framework, you've got to have this NHS certification. And I was like, shit, I don't have any of that. What am I going to do? So we persuaded Annabelle, who worked for Jenny, that what she was going to do was she was going to manually download a list of appointments every night and she was going to upload it to DrDoctor. So we hacked an integration together. But by doing that, we managed to demonstrate a 10% improvement in clinic throughput in women's services. And that was worth £320,000 a year to that department in that hospital. And we charged them £5,000 for the privilege. Interesting lesson there. So if you are a startup, I think it's really, really important, even in these early days, to charge something. And you have to charge something because you have to have your customer put value on the table as well. If you go and do something for free, it's not valued, people don't value their time, you have to ask for some money then and there. So we asked for £5,000, and to be honest, even getting that was quite hard. But for £5,000, we saved £320,000, so massive return on investment. I managed to get this in front of the medical director. He was very excited. Everybody thought this was a good idea. But things still weren't happening because we weren't big enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what I did was I got Jenny and I got her team to organise a beer and pizza night. And we invited every single manager across Guy's and St Thomas for beer and pizza in the kind of big, marble panelled room downstairs at St Thomas's Hospital that's been there since 1791. And Jenny told her peers how much of a difference this had made to patients. All I did was I paid for the beer, because you can't pay for that in the NHS. And we created a sort of a movement from the bottom up within Guy's and Tommy's. And all of these general managers then went and asked for the product to be used. And so we went through procurement. And we went from one customer, Heather and Wexham Park, in one department, which was physio, to winning a contract with the biggest teaching hospital in the country. So overnight, we went from 0 to, we've got to deliver this huge project. And we charged commercial rates for it, and that funded our first kind of team. So suddenly I had to go from hustler, who was, it was just about trying to get something over the line, to growing a team. And that change in gear was a really, really interesting thing for me. One of the massive things I learned as you go through various stages in your startup life is you have to change gears. So the challenges never stop, they just become different. And one of the big things that I've done, and I would recommend to anyone, is when you have to do something new, go on Amazon and find the #1 book for that thing. So having had a yes that we were going to get this contract, I had to then go and negotiate with the procurement department, and I'd never done anything like this before in my life, negotiate this contract. So I went and bought the book on, negotiation, the book on pricing, the book on contracting, and I read them all. And it doesn't make you an expert, but it gives you that little bit of something so you can at least sound like an expert. So we got that over the line, and suddenly I had to build a delivery team, I had to build a sales team, I had to build all sorts of other teams. And that's a really, really interesting challenge, because the key to that is hiring. And I'm sure you've had lots of people say this to you before, but the most important thing you can do as you go from hustler to scale-up CEO is learn how to hire. And there's loads of advice on hiring out there, but I wanted to share a few bits that I think I've learned. People talk about doing data-driven hiring, and I think that's absolutely right. You need to have a way of objectively analysing various people that come through the door. But actually, when you're scaling from 3 to 10, the most important thing is this person going to be a cultural fit? The heuristic for that is, if I've got to go and visit a hospital at the other end of the country, and I'm going to spend 6 hours in the car with this person, I'm going to stay overnight and have dinner with them, we're going to go into a really stressful pitch situation together, and then we're going to have to spend 6 hours in the car together coming home. Do I still want to talk to that person the next day? That is your #1 heuristic for your first 10 employees. Do I like these people? Do I want to work with them? Do they share in my mission, and do they share in my purpose? Because if they share in your mission and you want to spend time with them, you're halfway there. You're more than halfway there. You're 80% of the way there. And more than anything, we've found as we've grown DrDoctor is we've been really, really, really careful with who we've hired. Because it's quite easy to go, I need somebody now. And that wrong person, particularly when you're only 3 or 5 or 10, can have more negative effects on your business than anything else. I think probably the hardest thing I had to do was we got to about 16 people and I'd handpicked everyone, and remember, we're not venture capital backed, so we're paying through revenue and every pound really matters. And there was 2 or 3 people who just weren't right. And they were kind of members of the team, and I'd picked them and I'd brought them along with me. And I remember having to fire those 3 people, and I fired them all on the same day. It still is probably the hardest thing I've had to do in the business. So sitting people down who you've handpicked and you've made part of your family and having to tell them that they don't fit anymore is incredibly hard. So if you are hiring, hire slowly, hire carefully, and hire for culture, and hire for people that you want to spend time with more than anything else. And then grow that culture. So, we look for people who get things done and get on with others. We look for kindness and we look for compassion, because people that share those kind of things that matter to me are likely to do well in healthcare and are likely to do well with my team. And they will hire more people who are the same as that. If you hire somebody who you don't like or you think has a different mission to you, and then you let them hire, they're going to bring in 10 more people like that. So getting those first few right is more important than anything else that you can do. So at this point, we're now sort of 15 people. We've got 10 odd clients. Things are going really well. And a lot of our work is coming through network, and a lot of our work is coming through word of mouth. So we're not really doing any sales activity at this point. We're just doing a good job. And networking is something else I wanted to talk to you about. So networking is something that I have found incredibly powerful and useful. It's amazing how many people out there will give you 20 minutes in their day if you ask them a well-structured question. It's amazing how many incredibly successful people can find time for coffee if you just ask them. But what people often get wrong when they're networking is that they think it's a take. And the most successful networkers out there give as much as they take. Because actually, you don't know if the person you're talking to over drinks is going to go on to be the most successful founder you've ever met. And by giving as much as you take at networking events, you'll find that the referrals will come. And it was through networking that I then came across something called the National Innovation Accelerator. So the National Innovation Accelerator is a national program for scaling up of NHS innovations, clues in the name, I suppose. And if anyone here is doing an NHS innovation, I would recommend looking it up. And the NIA it's really interesting. So it's sponsored by Stephen Powis, who's National Medical Director. And what they do is they ask you to give 2 days a month of your time to the NIA. And they don't support businesses, they support individuals. So they look for people with a personal mission or an affinity with the NHS. They might look for a doctor who has practiced medicine for the last 20 years and has a real desire to change it. They might look for someone like me who's desperate to make access to healthcare better, and they invest in you. And I quite often get asked by entrepreneurs in the space, like, is it a good use of my time? Should I give 2 days a month of my important time to this thing that's about me? And my answer to that is always yes. Because by giving something back to the NHS, I've got so much back for the business. It's probably generated more business for us than anything else. It's taught me to grow. It's given me a support network. But it's also given us access to funding. So one of the things that came out of the NIA for me, which I never knew would happen, is that NHS England funded 12 pilots of DrDoctor in 12 new hospitals. So they gave us a fairly large chunk of money to go and scale and show hospitals how to do this stuff. So how do you adopt digital in your outpatients department? How do you create change in a hospital? And I would never have got that funding, and I would never have got access to those people if I hadn't said I was going to give something back to the NHS. So when you network and as you begin to achieve success, I think it's really, really important that you give as much back as you take. It's made such a big difference to me. How much longer have I got? A few more minutes. What else did I want to say? I think, I guess the final thing that I wanted to say is people think that entrepreneurship is about the idea. And Paul Graham, who is one of the founders of Y Combinator, and if you haven't heard of him, you should go and look him up. He's got an equation, and he says that the idea is worth 1 point. The team is worth 100 points, and the way that you execute is worth 1,000 points. And I don't think I've held anything truer to my heart than that when I started DrDoctor. The number of people that say to me, I wish I could do what you've done, but I haven't got a good idea, is amazing. Because it's not about your idea. Most startups start doing something and change and do something else. Like, we're not called Semantic Health, we're not trying to democratize healthcare. Actually, what we're doing was reducing non-attendance in hospitals. But by focusing on execution and team, getting the details right, making sure you've got the right people in the right seats, that you're with your clients, you're spending time with your users and your clients, and the product is delivering value for them, that's how you achieve success in healthcare, in startups generally, actually. And I think every single day I get out of bed and it still feels like day one to me. And it still feels like day one to me because we're still executing. We're still getting the detail right. And here we are in 2019, and DrDoctor handles 8 million NHS appointments a year. So I worked it out the other day, we handle 8% of all of the activity that goes through acute hospitals in the UK. We're going through a massive scaling phase. We're looking to double the team this year. As I said, we're sending nearly 60 million text messages a year. But every single day feels like day one. Every single day feels like a learning day. And that's because it's about executing. I'll end you with that thought. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.
I think it's probably, it's about every single March when we nearly run out of money. And that's because our customers are hospitals, and hospitals work on a yearly budgeting cycle, so many of our contracts get renewed in kind of April, May time. And as we've got bigger and bigger and bigger, like the cash flow curve does this every single year. And as you get bigger, it feels like it doesn't get any easier, just the risk profile changes slightly. So we've been really close to running out of money lots of times, and it's really, really stressful. And my advice when you're in that situation is that having co-founders is really important. If anyone's trying to do a solo startup, I would say try and find a co-founder, because having somebody to lean on in those times really matters. Be transparent with your staff. So we've always operated an open book policy, so everybody who works for me knows how much cash we've got in the bank, and so they can make their own decisions about whether or not they still want to be there. And remember, at the end of the day, you can always go back to your customers and ask for it earlier, which we've done a few times. So. Yeah, so we actually actively avoided VCs. And we did that for a number of different reasons. The first one was, so we started the business in 2012, and at that time, I don't think most VCs understood health tech very well. That has actually changed recently. And the feeling that we had was that people were looking for returns on a kind of, like, if you understand how the VC model works, right? So you'll start a fund and you'll look to get return on that fund in, say, 10 years is a typical period a VC fund works. So if you talk to venture capitalists, and let's have just opened that fund, they're looking for returns in less than 10 years. And healthcare tends to be a slower market, quite a lot slower. So we've been doing it now nearly 7 years, and I finally feel like we've got the traction that I wanted at 2 or 3. And we didn't feel that most healthcares understood that. And so they would push us down a route that we didn't want to take. And that's worked, so it's allowed us to stay really, really close to our customers and deliver things that are valuable for them. It's also nice being a founder who owns all your own equity. It's kind of it's not unique, but it gives you a control that perhaps you don't otherwise have. But what I would say is it always remains on the table for us, and it comes down to what will allow me to scale the business as effectively as possible while staying true to my mission. And I think in 2019, I think venture capitalists do understand health tech. There's some really good ones out there. There's more patient capital out there, people like Generation, who invest over a longer time period. So it's down to you, what matters to you, your personal incentives, and also what allows you to grow in the most appropriate way, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think a number of things. So that point of giving you somewhere to be really matters. Like, it's much, much easier to be a business when you're together with your co-founder and your first few staff in a space. For me, that was massive. Access to mentors and network. We were really lucky. We had Blaine Cook, who was the original CTO at Twitter, who was our technical mentor on BGV, and he was a phenomenal person for kind of pushing us to be more aggressive with some of the things we wanted to do tech-wise. And I think finally, and probably most importantly, is being with other people in the same situation as you. So when you are a startup founder, you have all these questions and there is nobody to ask. And to have peers who are doing the same thing at the same time at the desk opposite you or next to you is invaluable. You just go for a pint afterwards and share how difficult it is. That counts for so much. Yeah, so interestingly enough, I was at Arab Health 3 weeks ago, which is the biggest healthcare show in the world. It's amazing. There's 100,000 delegates or something like that. And I went there to understand what the rest of the world was doing. So we do want to take DrDoctor international. There's huge opportunity in countries like Australia, who have a similar healthcare system to the NHS. America, healthcare is broken and really needs help. So there's a huge opportunity there, but also kind of in developing countries. So China builds a new hospital a week at the moment, and is doing amazing things. Like they don't have primary care, they don't have GPs in China in the way we do, and they just want to cut that whole part of the process out and use technology instead. So there's a huge international opportunity, but also to do that you need lots of capital, and we would have to raise, I think, to do it properly. It is, and it is for a number of reasons. So we only do secondary care, we do hospital appointments, and there was a couple of reasons for that. Primarily, we did it because the secondary care space is quite underserved with technology, whereas in England, at least, the GP space is dominated by 2 or 3 big system suppliers. It's quite hard to get in the door. The second reason was the unit economics of secondary care worked a lot better for us. So rather than going to 1,000 GP practices and charging them £500 each, you could go to 10 hospitals and charge them 10 times as much or 100 times as much. So it was easier to get those first kind of cashable projects going. The other interesting thing is, I think, that secondary care is much more about you are sick and you need some coordination. Primary care, there's lots of kind of toing and froing for other reasons. So it's a different problem space. We will probably move to primary care at some point, but there's huge opportunity in the secondary care market first. So. It depends what day of the week it is. I think it is important to have an exit plan, but not to be fixated on it. So you often talk to people who are, on week 1 of their startup, and they're like, I'm going to sell to Google in 5 years' time, and this is what's going to happen. And you just think, that's not going to survive. For me, a startup is about the journey and it's about the path. And DrDoctor may go public. I would like to go public. I would like to IPO. That's what I'd love to do. But it might be that we sell to Google. It might be that we sell to one of the big healthcare systems integrators. It might be that we run it as it is for the next, 40 years of my life or whatever. Hopefully more than 40 years of my life. But when I think about exit, I'm much more interested in what does the journey look like, and making the journey fun and exciting, and it being the journey that I want it to be.
Fantastic. Let's give Tom a round of applause.